Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, South Africa plans sweeping power sector reform as state utility company Eskom struggles under a crippling $30 billion worth of debt, which regularly plunges the country into darkness. Also, at least 42 people are killed in landslides in Western Cameroon. The devastation is rare in the area and follows days of heavy rains. And Rwanda takes in refugees under an emergency program agreed with the AU and UN. Many arrivals at the transit centre near Kigali have been held in Libya in conditions of extreme violence, are now struggling to overcome the trauma suffered. But first, South Africa's unveiled long-awaited plans to break up and restructure its ailing state-owned energy company that's racked up $30 billion worth of debt. Eskom generates about 95% of the country's electricity, but the loss-making utility has been a huge drain on the economy. It's also not fit for purpose, as the country's long-suffered rolling blackouts as Eskom's old and badly maintained power stations struggle to service demand. The government says it's going to be divided into 3 subsidiaries, and the industry opened up to more competition. MC Ferreira tells us more.
Well, the first step that the minister announced is going to be to separate the transmission capacity of Eskom into a separate company, and then that will be followed by a further unbundling of the generation and distribution sections, and everything will be completed by December 2022. So the aim is to manage the company better, bring more renewable energy online and stop the financial losses, and then allow Eskom to service its debt. A lot is riding on this announcement. It's seen as overdue, and the timing is aimed at avoiding the loss of the country's last remaining investment grade credit rating, because Moody's is due to issue a review on Friday. There's a lot of nervousness around this announcement because Moody's has warned that another bailout for Eskom would be credit negative. And Finance Minister Tito Mboweni in July tabled a 59 billion bailout in Parliament. He's due to deliver his medium-term budget policy statement in Parliament tomorrow, and then he will give more details on that lifeline. The plan was not as well received as hoped because the rand weakened shortly after it was announced. And the immediate criticism was there was too little detail on how the transmission system operator will work. And there's some disappointment that these 3 unbundled entities will still fall under an umbrella Eskom holding company. But there's also skepticism as to whether the plans will actually be put into action as they were announced, because there's a strong opposition from labour unions who say it amounts to privatisation and job losses. But the big concern is that there was simply not enough detail on how Eskom will reduce the debt, and this means that the markets will really look to the finance minister tomorrow to provide more answers on that.
So how urgent is it that the government is seen to be getting a handle on Eskom's spiralling problems?
It's urgent because Eskom supplies 95% of South Africa's electricity, and it's also supplying 400 megawatts to Zimbabwe. And the local industry has been severely compromised by the scheduled blackouts or load shedding. It's made a recent reappearance in the past few weeks as old units are failing, and the company struggles to keep baseline supply while doing repairs to those units and ongoing maintenance. And the company is seen as the biggest state-owned enterprise, and it is the single biggest risk to the stability of the economy. The President has repeatedly warned. And this is linked to that $30 billion debt burden, because 62% of it's underwritten by the government. So any default there will have a dire effect on the country's finances, and hence the government continues to give it further cash injections to avoid a bailout. But this has a big effect on the budget deficit, which is expected to widen to 6.4% of the GDP as a result of this latest bailout in the current financial year.
MC Ferreira there for us. Now, Zimbabwe's central bank says it will roll out new notes and coins over the next couple of weeks in a bid to tackle devastating cash shortages. This all comes just months after the country stopped using US dollars and reintroduced its own currency. Inflation, though, quickly soared to nearly 300% in August, stirring up worrying memories of 500 billion % inflation seen under former leader Robert Mugabe. Despite the announcement of new notes, some analysts doubt that they will make much of a difference in restoring market confidence in Zimbabwe's economic health. Now, Cameroon says that at least 42 people were killed in a landslide in the west of the country. Hillside homes reportedly crumbled away after days of torrential rain. Indira Ayuk tells us more.
Inhabitants of the Ngwache neighborhood in Bafoussam in the west region of Cameroon are still in shock following a deadly landslide which hit the locality at about 10 p.m. Monday night. Several children are amongst the dozens of people who have died in the incident as corpses are being pulled out of the rubble of close to 11 houses which were swallowed by the mud. Local and administrative authorities appeared at the area early Tuesday to extend their solidarity and comfort to the affected families. Meantime, rescue teams are still working hard, pulling out bodies from the rubble. Meantime, the Minister of Decentralization and Interior Affairs has offered 25 million francs CFA to the Bafoussam 3 Council to be distributed amongst victims of the natural disaster. Meantime, there are fears that the landslides may extend to other surrounding areas if it continues to rain in the west region of Cameroon. This is one of the deadliest landslides which have hit that part of the country in recent times.
Well, Rwanda is taking in refugees and asylum seekers under an emergency program agreed with the African Union and the UN. A transit centre near Kigali's already started taking in arrivals, many of whom have been traumatised by their efforts so far to try and get to Europe. Many have been held in Libya in conditions of extreme violence. Our correspondents report.
It's almost midnight at Kigali airport, and it's the end of a long ordeal for these refugees and asylum seekers. For having attempted to cross the Mediterranean illegally, they were imprisoned, sometimes for years, in detention centres in Libya. Most of them aren't even 20 years old.
The group that arrived today are mostly from Eritrea, Somalia, Sudan and Ethiopia.
After the nightmare of Libya, they're welcomed by the United Nations and are transported to an emergency transit centre 1 hour from the Rwandan capital. They can then choose whether to return to their home country, go to a third country, or stay here in Rwanda. There are 189 residents living in the Gashora centre. Most of them are traumatised by the time they've spent in Libya. Rodwan says he was in detention there for almost 2 years.
You get to eat like only one time in the day, and the water you can drink in the toilet, wherever. The bad life that you can't describe how is the life in Libya exactly.
Rwandan authorities say they've got humanitarian reasons for welcoming refugees, and they're proud to help the United Nations get the refugees out of the inhumane conditions they encountered in Libya.
I'm so proud that Rwanda offered, to host them in that transitional time as they waited for any, option, as you said.
But many, like Rodwan, still envisage a future elsewhere.
I don't want to stay in Rwanda because it's not my hope, it's not my dream that I'm looking for. Sometimes I have like a confidence when I get the chance to go to Europe, achieve my dream.
Almost 120 new refugees and asylum seekers currently stranded in Libya are due to arrive here in November.
In Kenya, several hundred people are killed by snakes every year, leading one research centre there to try to develop East Africa's first anti-venom. Nicola Shima has more.
In order to save his life, this baby's finger was amputated after he was bitten by a snake. Around 700 Kenyans die from snake bites every year. Worldwide, the figure is 130,000.
The finger was left swollen and was very black. It started to rot. It had a bad smell, and the doctor suggested the finger be amputated so that it didn't affect the whole hand.
In rural areas, a motorbike ambulance is used to increase awareness about snakes and what to do when bitten. For some, the information arrived too late.
My 3-year-old daughter started crying and vomiting at 3 a.m. I didn't know a snake had bitten her. Next morning, I fetched water from the river, and on my way back, my eldest daughter told me her sister was dead.
In Nairobi, the Kenya Snakebite Research and Intervention Centre is working to save lives.
We're about to extract venom from We call it African puffer.
They extract venom and study it before injecting small amounts into donor animals like sheep. They then produce antibodies that are harvested and purified into antivenom. The centre wants to have East Africa's first antivenom on the market within 5 years. Currently, there are 2 effective antivenoms available in Kenya. They are imported from India and Mexico. One problem is that many ineffective products are also sold in sub-Saharan Africa.
And finally, he's certainly one to watch. 12-year-old Viamens Bamfo has become the youngest ever student at the University of Ghana. The keen pre-teen prodigy was accepted to study public administration after passing the entrance exam to the institution with flying colours. Viamens was homeschooled by his dad and says that he is set on becoming president by the time he's 40. Well, I have no doubt that he'll make a good run of it. That is, though, where we're going to have to leave it now for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again if you can. Take care.